Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to work on installing our front suspension. We've got our front control arms, hubs, rotors, brakes, brake lines, front shocks. Since the last video, we've got our radiator installed our coolant overflow bottle, our air box. I'm still waiting for some hardware, the factory hardware that secures the air box, that will secure the rear brake reservoir, have our rear master cylinder and rear brake line in place. All that bolted right in. But today we're going to go over getting these A-arms installed. I've already assembled them. They came disassembled where you had to install the heam joints. Went ahead and put anti-seize on everything before we installed it. These A-arms are completely adjustable for caster, camber, as well as obviously toe in and toe out for your tie rod ends. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to start with getting the lower control arms in place first. I like bolting them in first because then I can bolt the shock in, and then that will hold the A-arm in place and keep it from dangling down. And then we can go ahead and put our upper control arm in, and then finally our spindle, hub, and rotor. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Like a lot of aftermarket A-arms, these A-arms with the heim joints, it allows for a lot of adjustability on the A-arms, which is good when you're doing a build, because especially with an older frame, you never know what kind of little tweaks there may be in the frame that you don't see, and it'll allow you to compensate for those. So right now we're getting everything installed, and then once the bike is sitting on its own weight, then I'll be able to dial in the camber and the caster, and obviously toe in, toe out. I'll get it close today, but I'm not going to torque the bolts down until I get it under its own weight. Our hardware here, this is from a company called Spec Bolt. I'm not going to put anti-seize on it, but I am going to put, a smear of silicone on these bolts, because these spacers that the bolts go inside of are aluminum, and these are steel. I don't want to deal with any, major corrosion issues where they're going to lock up on that bolt. So just putting a little smear I'm going to put a little super lube silicone smear on there. It's clear, but it will help keep that bolt from seizing up, just like regular anti-seize does. All right, we're going to go ahead and these A-arms, by the way, are +2 A-arms, +2, +1. So they're going to bump the tires out 2 inches on each side and move them, expand the wheelbase by about 1 inch. So we're going to go ahead and get those adapters on and get them bolted in place. Okay, got our lower control arm bolted into place, our shock bolted into place on this side. Going to go ahead and do the other side, get the lower control arm and the shock into place, and then we're going to go ahead and get our reservoirs, our resis for our shocks mounted to the front here. We have bumpers that we'll be putting on here. And then there's just simple clamps that'll go around, and then the cans will get clamped right there, just like so. All right, let's gonna get the other side on. Okay, got the other side, lower control arm and shock in place. Got the shock reservoirs mounted. Right. Now, something to keep in mind when you're working with these aftermarket control arms. Number one, unless you're building a bike that you just disassembled and you're just putting it back together with what was on it, you may have to spread these depending on what control arms were on here previously. I had to open them up, spread them apart a little bit to be able to fit the new lower control arms. And this one even, I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera, but the heam joint, actually, bends a little bit that way, bends back a little bit. This control arm, when it was being made in its jig, is probably just a hair wider than it should be. And I actually had to shave this sleeve, take about a 1/16 of an inch off to be able to get it to slide in relatively easily. So you may have to do some modifications depending upon what you're doing with your bike and what parts you're putting on it. But bottom line, everything moves correctly, even with that little bit of modification I had to do in here. This thing still swings and moves smoothly, will still be just as strong, shouldn't have any trouble at all. So anyway, again, these are just loosely closed up, not tightening anything up yet. Next thing is going to be to put our spindles and hubs on, and then I'll put our upper control arms into place. Then we can get our tie rods in, and then basically our front end will be assembled at that point, and then it's just going to be dialing everything in and getting our measurements to get everything lined up correctly. All right, got the upper control arms in on both sides. They bolt right in the same way the bottom do. And I'm just going to scoot over here. This is what I was using. In my case, I did have to open up my my control arm mounts a bit. So I had unbolted the shock, stuck this into the hole, and just pried it just a little bit just to open it up. That allowed me to slide the heam joint and their adapters in. Hopefully not too much damage to the powder coat, and then those will actually obviously pull in nice and tight when we when I tighten the mounting bolts up and get them torqued. So next I'm going to put our spindles on. Now the way these heam joints work is there's an adapter here that acts like a ball joint basically. Gives you your ball joint taper to go into your spindle, but it's actually bolted in. I got to put Loctite on these yet, but I'm going to go ahead and get these put into place. Your spindles, now mine are already fully assembled with the caliper on them. They are marked right and left on the inside. They will go with the caliper up front. So we're going to go ahead and get them bolted in. It's very simple. You just like any ball joint, you're going to slide the spindle right down the taper, put your washer and nut, and then the reverse on the top. Okay, so got the first spindle in place. Again, just loosely putting the nuts in place to lock everything down. As you can see, I'm sure you can see it on the camera, I've got a lot of camber leaning in there up top. So, and this is one of the reasons why I haven't Loctited these fittings yet, because I'm going to have to take this out, slide the control arm up off that fitting, and then I can spin the heam out to, you know, get the proper camber on my spindle. But if I Loctite this in place, and if I'm on a half rotation, I could end up with the ball joint pointing up. So again, like I was saying before, I'm just getting everything in place. Once I get it under its own weight, I'll see what we have to adjust. Like I can obviously see here, I'm going to have to adjust this camber, get that corrected, and then I'll be able to tighten everything up once we know we have our proper settings. All right, not sure how the camera's picking that up, but I adjusted that heam out. Now I've got approximately about a degree of negative camber there leaning in, maybe 1.5 degrees, which really would be fine for off-road use. But we're going to go ahead and leave it at that. May have to adjust it out a little more, adjust it in, but I wait till I get the machine on its own weight, see where the suspension settles, and then we'll be able to go ahead and do the final adjustments. I'm going to go ahead and get the other side together now. All right, so we now have the left-hand side spindle on. Same thing, adjust it out, the upper heam, to try and get that camber to 0, -1 degree, right in that neighborhood. But again, until I tighten everything up, tighten all these up and pull everything together, that's going to adjust more. We may also need to adjust our caster, which your caster is basically an imaginary line going down between your upper ball joint and your lower ball joint. And you're going to have your caster be a little negative, tipping back a little bit. I have to measure how many degrees of caster we're sitting at right about now. I have to look in the specs to see what they want. I can't imagine it's any more than, you know, maybe 2 to 4 degrees, somewhere in that neighborhood. But again, we'll have to just double check and see. Next, I'm going to go ahead and get our tie rods installed. The tie rods, we are tie rod ends. One is a left-hand thread, the other is a right-hand thread. This way, once it's installed, you basically just have to loosen up your jam nuts, and you can just spin the rod in or out to adjust your toe in, toe out. Don't have to take it off either end. You can just spin it and adjust it that way. So we're going to go ahead and get that installed. Okay, tie rods are installed. Now I will go back and tighten up the castle nuts and put the cotter pins in on them. They are pretty much automotive style tie rod ends. I will tighten those up securely because any of the adjustment obviously will be with the jam nuts and with spinning the tie rod itself. But we now have steerable spindles. So that is it. That completes the installation of our front suspension. Like I said, I'm going to tighten up the tie rod ends, put the cotter pins in. Everything else I'm going to leave till I'm able to put this on the ground so I can really see where measurements are and adjust things further. Going to tighten everything to spec according to the manual. I got to look those specs up yet. I'll go ahead and list those in the information below the video for anybody that's doing this. I hope this helps anybody that's going ahead and installing a front end on their 250R, or if you're just following along on the project. I thank you very much for watching. If you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to leave them below. Like and subscribe if you like what we're doing. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.